We welcome you to our Provo Municipal Council meeting this evening. It's Tuesday, September 1st at 5:40 p.m. We apologize for the late start this evening. The meeting is being broadcast on, so the meeting is being taped for later broadcast. Apparently we're having technical issues this evening for a live broadcast, but it will be taped for later broadcast. But I believe it's still available on provo.org. The council requests that citizens help maintain the decorum of this meeting by silencing electronic devices and being respectful of those who are presenting during the meeting. We'll begin with the roll call. We'll start with our executive director,
Matt Taylor,
Ryan Jones,
Al Moore,
Alan Hales, Kim Santiago,
Gary Garrett,
Dave Sewell, Gary Goodman, Kay Van Buren, Rob Curtis.
Wayne Parker. Thank you. We have members here tonight from Troop 938 in the Sunset neighborhood who have agreed to help us with our opening prayer and pledge. And so we'll call on Cooper Harrison to come forward at this time, along with Curtis Sorensen. And we'll hear first from Cooper in offering our invocation, followed by Curtis, who will lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Our Heavenly Father, we're so very thankful for this day. We're thankful for all the many chances that God gives to us. We're thankful for the chance we have to come to this meeting and learn a little more. This is so we can all have a learning experience in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Curtis and Cooper and all of those from your troop. Appreciate your being here with us tonight. I'll now call for a motion relative to the approval of minutes from our past meetings. Council meeting on October 18th and the Board of Reclamation meeting that we held on August 25th. If council members have had a chance to review those minutes, I'll look for a motion to approve.
I'll make a motion to approve those minutes.
Thank you, Mr.
And
Anderson.
that 18th was,
So 18th was the council meeting,
yes,
and
Board
25th was the board of
of Canvas.
Board of Canvassers.
Canvas, that's what I was thinking. Yes, thank you.
And a second by Mr. Van Buren. Thank you. Those in favor? And that passes unanimously. We'll now turn the time to Mayor Curtis for a special item of business today.
Thank you, council members. I'd like to address you from this point and ask Aaron Skabin to join me. And Aaron, do you have some guests you'd like to bring with you? September 8th is Bike to School Week. And we have a couple of young bikers and a couple of old bikers. And Aaron, why don't you explain a little bit and then I'll read the proclamation.
Sure. So this next week is our 5th annual Provo School District Bike to School Week. Nearly all of the schools in the Provo School District will be participating this year. It's, as a Provo Bicycle Committee, we kind of get the ball rolling, throw it out to parent volunteers, and schools can participate in any way that they would like to do. And this is a poster that was made for this year's week. Thank you.
Did they have anything they wanted to add? and sometimes people ask me where they come from. And this next one, I'm not going to give you the source, but I'm claiming Provo City Bicycle Committee, the #1 bicycle committee in the United States. And you heard it right here. So with that, let me share with you this proclamation. Whereas in 1969, now some of us will remember 1969 and we're not riding our bikes to school. In 1969, 87% of us, all school children who lived within a mile of school, walked or biked to school. You remember that. Now only 33% of our students do that. Whereas in the last 4 years, child obesity rates have soared, with over 25 million children and adolescents, more than 33% now overweight. And whereas the increase in driving has contributed to air pollution, which is particularly bad in Utah County, especially in these few years due to geography. And whereas there has been a 74% increase in asthma among kids in the last 25 years. Now therefore, I, John R. Curtis, Mayor of the City of Provo, do hereby proclaim September 8th through the 11th, 2015 as Bike to School Week, and encourage students of all ages to walk or bike safely to school at least 3 times during the week, and we'll extend that to challenge our goals to do that for right to work if all possible during that week as well. And thank you for your support, Council, and thank you to the great bicycle community and these great future leaders of our city. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor Curtis, and thank you again, Aaron, for your work and service to our city. All of your efforts, we appreciate it. Next, we'll begin the public comment portion of our meeting. This segment is an opportunity for any person here to comment on matters that do not appear as a public hearing on the agenda tonight. Should you wish to make a comment at the podium, please speak into the microphone and begin by stating your name and city of residence. Should you not wish to speak, but instead would like to have your comments read, you can deliver them to our recorder sitting up here and she'll do so. Those who wish to speak should do so courteously and briefly. Please be aware that council members and administration will not take any formal action on the matters that arise during public comment, but they may respond informally as appropriate. Also be aware of other means for addressing the council and administration, including email, social media, telephone, all of which are listed on our Provo City website, provo.org. Those who wish to make comments are invited to approach the podium at this time.
Hello, my name is John Scott, and I live in Provo. And I heard that Provo has a policy of protecting children. I know that you can't take any action, but I'm here on behalf of my children. I have an 8-year-old daughter and an 11-year-old son. To my right, there's a picture that was taken last year. My daughter went with her mother and an opinion, and I got her back, and her hair was like this. I went to DCFS, I went to police, I went to court, I went to every official that I could think of who laughed at me and refused to do anything. And then this girl right here, her name is Paige Methley. She was attacked inside of Provo 4th District Court Room 303 by Andrea Pena on July 7th. She had a 3.5-pound object thrown against her back. She was called an idiot and we were both ripped off. We sought the help of court, civilly. We went to police, we went to sheriffs, we've gone to post, we've gone to the Attorney General, we've gone to our elected officials and everyone that we could think of. No criminal charges were filed, nothing was done. All court action was denied. And then on August 7th, I was awarded a protective order for my children and myself by 4th District Court. I went to retrieve my kids as lawfully allowed, and I was denied. And then 3 days later, received my children, and Cloudy Laycock, a judge in 4th District Court, later issued a no contact order against me and a writ of assistance informing law enforcement that they could take my children from me by any means necessary. I haven't seen my children or had contact with them since August 24th when I asked for help. They were taken from me without any criminal record or any prior history of violence and they were given to a violent person who committed a violent act in the middle of the courtroom, and no one did anything about it. And my children are not there, and I cannot have any contact with them or get them. And lots, it seems very unconstitutional. My religious freedoms are violated with my children. I'm not allowed to pray with them or hold religious services, which we do daily. I'm not allowed to participate in their school. I can't contact them. I can't see them, and they're with a violent person. And they can't take action but ask for direction.
Thank you, Mr. Scott. We appreciate your coming here this evening and sharing that with us, and we'll invite you to share some details with our Chief Administrative Officer, Mr. Wayne Parker, and we can see if there might be avenues that could be pursued through our public safety. Thank you. Any other public comment? If not, we'll close public comment and turn to our first agenda item this evening, which is an annual report from the Provo City Justice Court. This will be presented by Judge Rick Romney. Judge Romney, we're pleased to have you here with us tonight and look forward to your annual report of the Provo City Justice Court.
Mayor, members of council, Curtis, Parker, thank you for the opportunity to be here. Appreciate it very much. I'm happy to be here with Leanna Newton, our court administrator, who does extraordinary work in making sure that our justice court functions well and provides excellent service to the citizens of Provo. We have a wonderful staff, the members of which work hard and efficiently every day with those who come to court to conduct their business. There are close to 100 justice courts in the state of Utah, and in April 2015, just a few months ago, our justice court received the Justice Court Award of the Year award at the annual Justice Court Conference in St. George. The selection was made by the Board of Justice Court judges and was a significant honor for our court. We are pleased with the recognition. It's a tribute to Rhiannon and our court clerks and to the service they give to the public. Many, if not most, of our customers are not happy to be in court, but they are treated fairly and have the opportunity to be heard. The motto for the justice courts in Utah is to improve the quality of life in our community, and we feel like we've done that and continue to do that here in Provo. You may be interested to know that this year is the 800th anniversary of Magna Carta, which is Latin for the Great Charter. The document has come to stand for the principle that no one is above the law. Rebellious English barons presented a list of remedies of long-held grievances to King John. The king had recently failed to reclaim the French lands that he had inherited and lost, and had attempted to rebuild his coffer by demanding what's called more scutage. And that was a fee paid in lieu of military service, which he assessed often during his reign. The barons had received the support of London, and they would only allow John to remain on the throne if he acquiesced to their demands. The Archbishop of Canterbury drafted Magna Carta in Latin, and on June 15, 1215, King John of England fixed his seal to the document. And this happened at Runnymede near Windsor, England. Magna Carta is 800 years old, and several of its provisions are particularly relevant today. One states, quote, "To no one will we sell, and to no one deny or delay right or justice." Another passage states that no free man should be taken or imprisoned or dispossessed or outlawed or exiled or in any way ruined, nor will we go or send against him except by the lawful judgment of his peers or by the law of the land. Any citizen who is served on a jury will relate to that passage. The right to trial by jury finds its roots in Magna Carta, is one of our most cherished constitutional rights. Magna Carta is also important because in it, King John agreed to be bound by the law. During the Revolutionary War here in the colonies, Magna Carta inspired and justified action in the defense of liberty. The colonists believed they were entitled to the same rights as Englishmen, which rights were guaranteed in Magna Carta. Magna Carta is the origin, foundation of many enduring constitutional principles, including the rule of law, the right to a jury trial, the right to a speedy trial, freedom from unlawful imprisonment, protection from unlawful seizure of property, the theory of representative government, the principle of no taxation without representation, and the concept of fundamental law, a law that even the king cannot change. We're grateful for our foundational constitutional rights and principles and appreciate the opportunity to see them in action every day in the cases in which we handle in the Provo City Justice Court. In fiscal year 2015, which ended on June 30th, the Justice Courts of Utah handled 459,622 cases. This number represents a little more than 60% of all the cases filed in the state courts in Utah, which were 763,772 cases. Most of the cases filed in Utah go through the Justice Court. In the Provo City Justice Court during the same fiscal year, there were 12,535 cases filed, of which 1,909 were criminal cases, 9,404 were traffic cases, and 1,222 were small claims cases. This number of cases, measured against the weighted caseload standard of the Administrative Office of the Courts, was calculated to be 1.59 times that of a caseload of a full-time judge, or 159% of a full-time judge's workload. The public which we serve in Justice Court continues to be very satisfied with the service provided to them. We recently completed a customer service survey earlier this summer. In that survey, the customers were asked to rate their satisfaction in 4 areas: as to staff and facility, their experience in appearing before the judge, the court's website, and their experience in telephoning the court. The customers were asked to respond to statements describing customer service and to indicate whether they strongly agreed, were neutral, disagreed, or strongly disagreed with the statements. The highest, most positive score that could be attained on the survey was 5.0. From a survey of 192 respondents and a survey conducted over 2.5 weeks, the average turned out to be 4.63. We are pleased that our patrons are satisfied with the service they receive in Justice Court. You may have heard of the Justice Reinvestment Initiative report, and that was created by the Commission on Criminal and Juvenile Justice at the request of Governor Herbert and others. This report listed recommendations to make Utah a safer state by increasing efforts to reduce the rate of recidivism of offenders released from custody. The report led to legislation aimed at providing offenders with proper treatment, from substance abuse to mental health treatment. The legislation also included turning most drug possession charges into misdemeanors instead of felonies and strengthening probation and parole supervision. The legislation also reduced the classification of most traffic offenses from Class C misdemeanors to infractions. Most of these legislative changes will affect cases prosecuted in district court other than in justice court. However, it is possible that we will see an increase in the number of drug possession charges filed in justice court. We are pleased with our mental health court program, which has been ongoing since our court was founded in 2007. It has been effective in reducing recidivism. Programs like Mental Health Court have helped transform the way in which we hold nonviolent offenders accountable and help reduce repeat crime. Graduates of Mental Health Court spend less time in jail during the time they are in mental health court and are less likely to return to jail. If they do return, they rarely return as quickly as those who do not go through that program. We are also pleased with our dedicated domestic violence calendar, which is heard every Wednesday morning. This calendar helps facilitate resolution of these types of cases and brings together defendants, their attorneys, prosecutors, victim advocates, and service providers in an attempt to better handle these cases. Our domestic violence calendar has received favorable attention from the director of the Utah Domestic Violence Council. Our collaboration remains strong between our Justice Court and BYU and Utah Valley University. Law students from BYU and college students from these other institutions have served and continue to serve as interns and externs in our court, earning college credit for their work in assisting defendants in being advised of their constitutional rights, ensuring that defendants are making contact with their attorneys, managing the flow of cases to be as smooth as possible in the courtroom, and in the case of law student externs, researching legal issues for the court. Our mediation program continues with college and law students who also serve as mediators in small claims court cases. helping the litigants either resolve their cases in a mutually acceptable manner, or when the cases do not resolve, and helping identify the issues in the case, giving each party a realistic picture of the strengths and weaknesses of his or her case. Many of the mediated cases resolve without trial, which is mutually beneficial for the parties involved. We have implemented our judicial workspace program and on our in-court computers as part of the statewide court computer technology program, assisted by 6 scanners given to us by the Administrative Office of the Court, and they have approved us for 2 additional scanners. We've also applied for and were given a grant of $1,000 from the Administrative Office of the Courts, the Management Committee of the Judicial Council, to purchase video monitors for our courtroom. This will assist those in the courtroom see interaction between the judge and inmates who appear through the video system in the jail or prison. This will also be helpful in trials in which video presentations are part of the evidence. Our court facility is comfortable, and light and airy, and suits our needs. We've been there now for about a year and a half and are grateful for it being a spacious, comfortable, light, and accommodating building. I was recently appointed as one of the 6 members of the Justice Court Board, which meets almost every month and has responsibility for management and resolution of issues involving all of the justice courts in Utah. I continue to serve as a member of the Justice Court Education Committee, responsible with other members of the committee for planning our 30 hours of continuing education, which each of us as judges receives every year. I'm also currently serving as the chair of the Language Access Committee of the Administrative Office of the Courts, which meets every other month and handles issues involving court interpreters and language access in courts statewide. I'm also one of 6 members of the Trust and Confidence Committee, which has the responsibility of improving public awareness of justice courts and what they do. It's great to be involved with my fellow judges around the state and see the good that justice courts do statewide. Thank you so much for your support of our Provo City Municipal Justice Court. It is a privilege and a pleasure to work with such a dedicated court administrator and staff to help improve the quality of life in Provo. Do you have any questions that I could answer?
Any questions for Judge Romney?
If you're working at 159%, it sounds like you could use some help.
Well, so far so good.
Except that you're doing an exemplary job, but
I love to keep busy, and it's wonderful to be able to go home every night and feel like we're helping achieve the mission, which is to improve the quality of life in the community. So I love what I do. I'm grateful for the opportunity.
a tremendous benefit to our community. Thank you.
You introduced Ms. Newton, and we know Mr. Borgen. The other person sitting in that row?
My wife, Mrs. Romney. And I'm glad that she's here with me, too. Appreciate her support. I couldn't do it without her.
Sure.
Any other questions that I could answer?
Just as you have an annual obligation to come and report to this council, I feel an annual obligation to congratulate you and tell you how much we appreciate you. And by you, I mean the greater you and Rhiannon and everybody that works over there. It's an amazing facility. To have a customer service satisfaction rating when people are coming with the types of problems they're coming with is really pretty amazing. So thank you, to the whole team.
Thank you very much. And as Magna Carta gave us the right to jury trials, we're right now in the middle of jury deliberations. I need to go back to court, so if I may be excused, I would appreciate that. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Judge Romney. And thank you for the tour last year, too, of
You're
your
welcome.
facility.
Please come back.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Next, we'll turn to a resolution approving the mass notification interlocal cooperation agreement between Utah County and various cities, including Provo. This will be presented by Provo's Emergency Management Coordinator, Chris Blinsinger.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for having me here. And we discussed this in the work session. This will provide the opportunity for Provo City to participate in the interlocal agreement for our notification system, which will eventually be a countywide notification system, but Provo City will remain our own organization with our own control over our own notification. But it does enhance our capability for large-scale events or notifications as necessary. And I would remind council members that this is a notification system. This is not an emergency notification system, so while it can be used for those emergency notifications, it's also quite useful for us many other ways. Within each department has specific ways they can use that to benefit the efficiency and capability of their departments. So I would ask for your approval of this interlocal agreement that we can engage with the county and move forward with our implementation of this system within Provo City.
Thank you, Chris. I think you told us a couple of weeks ago when you presented which cities in the county are already part of the agreement?
There are a number.
About 25?
There's quite a few, and many of them are similar to Provo, waiting for this interlocal agreement to be signed and the paperwork and that thing. But right now, we all have access to this system. We have been testing this system. We've had our dispatchers involved with training, and our implementation team has met. We have another meeting on the schedule. So we are moving forward on the backside, waiting for this official interlocal agreement to be approved.
Mr. Winterton? Ms. Santiago?
So the equation for deciding what price we pay is you take the number of all the residents that are involved in the agreement, and then you would divide out our population. Is that correct?
Correct. And
So-
it is based off of number of households.
Households. So if other cities decide not to sign this agreement, or if they do and then they drop out, I know there's a clause for a breach of contract, but if they decide not to sign up, does that increase our cost, or is it all?
It would increase our cost, and while we have a one-year agreement with, this is going to be an annual payment, so if we decide that is not the way we want to go, we of course can opt out ourselves. However, the fact that it's mutually beneficial for each jurisdiction in the county, and we have already seen the benefit of that with several jurisdictions who had signed with another notification agency who are now participating with this notification provider. I believe that it's a very strong case for the opportunity to have that cost savings to us. I would have to thank the county commissioners for, they basically wrote the check, and they're waiting for those payments to be made to them. So they basically have paid for that for the first year. And but there is that challenge if people decide not to opt out to do something else. There's only 2 jurisdictions in the county who are not participating currently. American Fork is doing something else, and I'm sorry, I don't remember the other one. It's a small jurisdiction. But in our implementation meetings at the county, we've had great feedback and great participation with the agencies involved.
So if they've already written the check, then that's what we would be making up that difference for those cities that aren't doing it this year. But in the next year, would that be less because we're not having to pick up the?
No. They have already prescribed the amount that we would pay based on our population, and that is what we will pay based on our population. We're not paying for anyone else at this time. So the county is going to take the hit this year.
Okay, so the county will absorb
Right.
that. Okay.
Right.
All right, thank you.
This is also mass notification. It doesn't affect us as far as dialing 911 from anywhere in the county. We won't be attached to Orem's 911 system. This is outgoing. Is that correct? Is that for the residents? So if somebody dial, it doesn't have anything to do with the 911 system.
No, this is a web-based system. This is not connected to our 911 system. However, our dispatchers are trained to make notification, but as I said, it's a web-based system. I can make notifications from my phone, so it does not have an impact on what's going into our dispatch center.
Any other questions?
Mr. Chair,
Yes,
I
Mr.
make
Miller.
a motion to approve the resolution as written.
Thank you, Mr. Miller. Motion to approve with a second by Ms. Hales. Thank you. Those in favor? And that motion passes unanimously. Thank you. Thank you
very
again,
much.
Mr. Chris. I'll now call for a motion to recess as the Municipal Council and reconvene as the Redevelopment Agency of Provo. Motion by Mr. Van Buren with a second by Mr. Winterton. Those in favor? Thank you. And we'll turn now to the Chair of the Redevelopment Agency of Provo, Mr. David Sewell.
Thank you, Mr. Garrett. Let me get on the right page here. Okay, looks like we've got an item here concerning a resolution to approve a new window egress program, and this is going to be presented by Cindy Sweeten.
Thank you. Good evening, Council, Mayor, and Mr. Parker. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. So we introduced this egress window program back in November to the RDA Exec Committee, and they thought it was a good idea to move forward with it. So I brought it to the work session 2 weeks ago, and we went over more of the details of it. You've been given an action item and the program guidelines that I hope you had a chance to look over. So tonight I'm bringing it here for the approval from the full RDA board. And I have a quick little PowerPoint that's condensed down from the last one that we can go over quickly if we have that here. Okay, sorry. Okay, so meetings with the council members and citizens determined that programs to improve and maintain neighborhood integrity through the repair and rehabilitation of the current housing stock were desired in Provo City. Utah County's analysis of impediments states that Provo lacks affordable housing for larger families and expressed concern over the maintenance of the city's aging housing stock. According to Provo City's consolidated plan, we should design programs that encourage the preservation and improvement of our housing stock and focus on the safety and livability of these homes. So one solution that we've come up with to help fulfill the needs and fix some of these impediments, the RDA is proposing an egress window program. Now, an egress window is a window or a window well large enough as defined by local building codes for exit or entry in case of an emergency. So the program would help increase the supply of larger housing units by increasing the number of conforming bedrooms in the home that meet code. The program would help preserve and improve the aging housing stock by replacing old dilapidated windows. And the program would help protect the health and safety of the homeowner and their family by installing large enough windows and window wells for emergency exits. So this is a loan/grant program for low to mod income owner occupants of single family residential homes. It's a 0% interest deferred loan with the possibility of forgiveness over 5 years if the owner stays in the home. And the program will be funded through our 2015-16 CDBG allocation. So I've come to you, the staff recommends approving this resolution for a new egress window program. Do you have any questions about the program?
For the public benefit, could you describe some of the requirements as far as, so you mentioned owner-occupied, and that, I know there was a concern of a citizen that was here earlier that thought that these homes could be turned into apartments, or the basement could be turned into an apartment, but it has to be homeowner-occupied.
Correct.
And they have to occupy it for 5 years.
If they
to
want
have the loan forgiven. If they move within the first 2 years, then they have to repay plus 50%, is that correct?
Correct, yes.
Okay. All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
And could you remind us of the value of each loan,
It's anywhere from $2,500 to $3,000 to install a window. So depending on if they need 1 or 2 windows, the loan could be up to $6,000. It would place a deed on the home, a lien against the home.
per homeowner? They could request up to that much.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Doesn't look like this is noticed for public comment, but did anyone come to speak regarding this item? If not, we'll turn the time over for council discussion or a motion.
Mr. Chair, I make a motion to approve the resolution as written.
Is there a second? Ms. Santiago. All in favor? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you. I'll look for a motion to adjourn the Redevelopment Agency of Provo meeting and reconvene as the Municipal Council of Provo meeting. Mr. Winterton, is there a second? Mr. Garrett, all in favor? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sewell. Next, we turn to an ordinance enacting a temporary zoning amendment to Provo City Code Chapter 14.50 in the Arbors on the Avenue Project Redevelopment Option Zone to reduce the minimum finished floor area. And this item will be presented by our Deputy City Attorney, Mr. Brian Jones.
Mr. Chair, could I have you also read in item 5? They're so closely similar that I'd like to
Sure.
handle them at the
Item
same time.
5 is a resolution approving an amendment to a development agreement regarding property generally located at between 5,000 and 5,200 North University Avenue in Provo to allow 6 additional units and to decrease the minimum parking spaces per dwelling unit.
Thank you. Let me give some logistical and legal background about how these two items came forward and what they're about. And then if the chair desires, it may be appropriate to turn some time over to the applicant to present details about the actual project. In addition to that, before I forget, I'll note that even though I'm not sure that we stated it this way on the agenda, but item number 4, because it is a zoning amendment, needs to be a public hearing, so we'll need to open that up for public hearing. Yes?
Just to save you some time, we redesigned item number 4. You can take that one off. We were able to increase square footage
Okay.
on those 4 units, and so they're all over the required limit.
Okay, well, very good. So it sounds like item number 4 is moot. So the developer for this project came to us some time back and asked for an amendment to an existing development agreement between the city and their predecessor in interest. And at the time, there were 4 requests that they wanted changed. And as it turned out, during the last week, the reason why item 4 is on the agenda is because it came to our attention that 2 of the 4 things they wanted changed were actually elements of city code of the actual pro zone where the development is being built, rather than items in the development agreement. And so we discussed that the only way to handle that would be to actually change the city code. But apparently, one of the 4 items regarding carports wasn't actually necessary to change in the code, and the square footage requirement apparently has already been fixed. So it appears that item number 4 is appropriate to be withdrawn at the developer's request. So that just leaves item number 5, where, as I understand it now, all that they are asking is an amendment to the development agreement, and that amendment does 2 things. It increases the number of allowable units on the property from 112 to 118, and it reduces the minimum parking spaces per dwelling unit from 2.6, which was required by the agreement, to 2.1, which is what the zoning requires by default. So that's what's before you. Would be just item 5, a resolution approving an amendment to the development agreement. But I'd leave it to your discretion to have the applicant talk about what the project is and answer any questions about the actual project and the changes they've requested.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. I think it would be helpful to the council and to the public to hear from the developer and receive that update relative to the parking spaces and anything else about the project you'd like to make us aware of.
Members of the City Council, Chairman, my name is Paul Warnock. I am an architect with JZW Architects. I was the original architect on what we called the Phase 1 portion of Arbors on the Avenue development, and will also be the architect of record on this phase. The owner, however, as I think was mentioned, has changed. The ownership of the property has changed multiple times, and today I am representing Mr. Harrison Horn as the owner. Just a quick summary, maybe, of the project. As it was originally presented 6 years ago, The project included a total of 112 individual condominium units. As we are requesting today, the project would consist of 118 residential units. The overall square footage of the Phase 2 portion of the project, which is what we are considering today as Phase 1 has been completed, is a significant reduction in the original size of the building, as the overall units have been dramatically reduced from what they were. This is really a factor of the economy and, you know, the feasibility of what the project can be built for at this point in time. Most of the building is very similar to what was presented and what is currently constructed as Phase 1. The exterior look of the building will be very compatible with the existing structures that are on the property. It remains a 4-story structure. Other significant differences from our project to what the current project has: we have eliminated the underground parking that is included in the original phases, and due to that, we do have more parking adjacent to the building on both the west and the north and south sides of the building. I do have a rendering. I should have given this to your technical people, but I wonder if it would help you visualize a little bit what we're doing. While he pulls that up, I would be available for any other questions that you may have for me regarding the project.
I just have a question for Mr. Jones. You said 2.21. I was under the impression that the zone that we have this is under 2.25 parking per unit.
I guess I'll have to look that up.
But I just was in community development. I thought that's what we had talked about, but I just wondered, where are we at? What is?
I thought the 2.1 was the underlying pro zone requirement, but
Where are you now with this?
Okay,
are you
so
at 2.1?
We are hoping to hit 2.1. Right now, as the latest plan that we have developed put us at right close to the 2.2 number. That was based on 266 stalls. Part of the reason we're requesting a slightly lower count is because to get that number of stalls, we're pushing into the hillside. If you're familiar with the property, it's a very steeply sloping property, and the parking on the south and north ends of the building push into that hillside significantly enough that we have very large retaining walls. We're concerned about that just obviously from a cost point of view, but also just a safety point of view. And there are hill stabilization measures in that hillside that are very challenging. The less impact we have on the hillside, the better off we are.
In response to your question, you are correct. I had understood from community development that it was 2.1, but as I look at the code, it is 2.25. So that is the most that we could reduce it by agreement without going back for a text amendment to the zone.
Our feeling is we can make that work.
I think the 2.1 number came from the new,
This is being broadcast, so we have to have people speak into the microphone, and per the rules, we need people to state their name and city of residence.
Mr. Guerra, can I have just a follow-up
Yes.
question? Can you also, when you're doing those calculations, is that based on the 112 or the 118 units?
118.
So that's with the, getting
Yes,
that
so-
increase, and it's
Yes,
based
we're
on that.
looking at and one important distinction, we're looking at the overall project as a final project. So it includes the number of units that we're requesting, and that does, there's the existing buildings that have been built were built at more parking stalls were built under those buildings, anticipating this Phase 2. So part of what we want to be clear on is we are using existing parking stalls that have been built in the existing phase to get the overall count where it should be.
It's to your advantage, not in any way, that's helping you.
Yes, yes. And maybe another point that's important to know, Mr. Harrison Horn has negotiated with the current homeowners association. I think they are fairly positive about the project, and you know, that has been part of the process of getting an overall project that will be viable and attractive both to the existing homeowners and to our new portion of the development. And there's been some exchange of value in those negotiations as well.
Maybe I could just take a moment and add a few things, just kind of, there's so much more has gone into this than just parking. One of the first points I'd just share with you.
Better say your name.
I'm sorry, Harrison Horn, local Provo resident for the last 40 years, but mostly I work out in Park City. Our developments are generally in the ski resort area. Over the course of our negotiations on purchasing the property, we are the fifth person who's undertaken trying to redo the bankruptcy that took place on this property. The latest developer in town that had it under contract and then passed on it because it wasn't feasible economically was Ivory and Associates. So we have spent a lot of time trying to make it work. It's kind of a blighted area, but I live just off University Avenue and drive by it every day, and finally came up with a couple of ideas that I thought we could apply to it and make it feasible, which we have done. In the process, some of the things that we've been able to do is we've reduced the overall footprint or impact on the area by 27%. So we pulled 35,000 square feet of buildable space that was approved for from the project. In doing that, we've increased from 30% of open space to 74% open space. We've also been able to increase, if you drive by the arbors, you probably notice it just kind of seems like it's sitting right on the curb. It's just very close, even though it's maybe 100 feet back. In reality, we've been able to almost double the impact on that. So we've been able to push these buildings back just about twice as far back as what you see there now. Also in the back, because it's now not two buildings double stacked, we've been able to go from a 20-foot rear yard setback for the residents to a 70-foot rear yard setback for the residents. A couple of the other things that we've been able to do is the homeowner association on that first phase you see is quite run down. They're broke. They have no money to finish the project. The stone's falling off. There's many problems with the first phase. I don't know how old it is. So there's been no deferred maintenance for 7 years. And so we have made the agreement with them that we are cleaning up all of the first phase and redoing their stonework and putting in extra parking for them. There are some things there that will actually make them viable, fixing up the pool and some of the areas that were in disrepair. Of the 134 that were allowable in the zone, even with the increase of 8 units, we're still at 118. So the zone, the pro zone, allowed us 134 units, and we're putting 118 in. So basically, that kind of shows that some of the things that we've been able to accomplish there that have increased, I think, the livability of the project and the desirability of it. We will be looking at selling them at some point in time. For the time being, they will mostly be rentals. They were originally intended to sell for approximately the high threes. When we complete them, we will be able to sell them for just a little bit less than it's costing us to build them. So there really is no way to make a profit on this project for a number of years. But we've prepared for that as we feel that the rents will sustain it until what we would estimate about 36 months before the market will reach a marketable goal. So the parking issue at 2.1 sounds like we're asking for a lot. I might have shared with a few of the council members, primarily my development career has all been in Park City and ski resort properties. I just finished approval on a project up there of 36 $1.1 million townhomes. And we're just starting a 300-room hotel also at the Canyon Ski Resort. In that process, I had to fight with the Planning Commission up there for about 6 months to get them to go off of the parking requirement. And so what we came off the parking requirement is that they would not allow me to put more than 0.8 parking spaces per unit. These are $1 million units, and you get less than one parking space. So that's kind of the direction that parking is going right now. And so it was kind of confusing for me to come down and see 2.6 is across the country right now, it's huge. That's kind of a thing of the past almost, but the code says that, so we're asking for a reduction on that. Also, I point out, I believe that the current code for high-density residential is only 2.1. So I believe that we would still be meeting your current high-density code for parking. Any other questions, comments?
I have a question. So when you're in your units, how many bedrooms, what's the highest number down to?
We've maintained the same number of bedrooms as the first phase was approved for.
Which is?
We have 3 rooms. 2 of those we can call bedrooms. The third one opens into a hallway, which we can't legally call it a bedroom, so it would be like an office or a rumpus room or something.
So your largest unit would have 2 and an office type?
But there's 3 full-size rooms there, as well as your living room, kitchen, dining room.
Okay, thank you.
And also, just to address what we waived with this first part was that we only had 4 units out of the 68, which were shy of the 1,100 mark, okay? And it was not that difficult. We've been able to bump those up to 1,167 square feet and still retain the 3 rooms in each of those units. So that's why it just wasn't worth waiting 6 months or more for an approval, especially while financing happens to be right now today the best I've ever seen. It's like almost 4%. So we really like to get this off the ground while the rates are in our favor.
Other questions, Mr. Sewell?
Mr. Horn, it sounds like the second project is fairly similar to the first in a lot of ways. Have you looked at the parking in the first phase, and do you have an estimate of how many spaces per unit are actually being used there?
Yeah, actually, we've done 4 surveys of that, and at 6 p.m. In the afternoon, 70% of the parking spaces underground are not occupied. At 3 a.m. in the morning, 50% of the underground parking spaces are not occupied. So fully 50% all day long of the underground parking in the other parking structure are not occupied. During most of the day, the only spaces that are really occupied pretty much all day long are the above ground spaces over at the second phase there.
Thank you.
Are the spaces designated to this particular unit number, or can anyone park where they want, outside or underneath?
1 space per unit is assigned.
Underneath or outside?
Either way.
Oh, okay.
And then generally, you try to just assign that space closest to the individual's residence. The rest of them are first come, first served. The reason we do that is that when there's a lot of studies that show the moment you start assigning both spaces, you have a parking problem. As long as you have those other ones floating, we never have a parking problem. In my opinion, about 1.7 parking spaces is totally adequate for this project. But we didn't want to go that far with it, with the requirement at 2.5. So.
Mr. Winterton?
Did you say, Harrison, that you're going to combine to one homeowners association, ultimately, you're helping the other one right now, but are you going to ultimately be one homeowners association?
Yeah, we've already combined that, Gary, and so we'll be, the moment we build, we'll be picking up a little bit better than half of the association expenses and dues there. Also, I might add that we had a failing hill in the back. I don't know if any of you have noticed that big canal that's up above us there. That was, we had that surveyed, and that became a real issue before we even bought it, because it could have cost us as much as $250,000 to repin that hill. And so that was part of our decision to buy. We've worked very closely with Bill Pepperoni and have his blessing on all the things that we've asked for. He felt that they were all, is Bill here tonight?
Doesn't look like he is, no.
But that we've asked his advice all the way through the approval process and the things that we required. We actually went to him before we closed on the property and said, you know, these are kind of a minimum things that we have to do to make this fly, Bill. And we just need to know now before we've committed, because we had a very short closing date. The people who own the property had it up for sale forever and had 4 sales, take it under contract for like 6 months, spend 6 months analyzing it, only to figure out it didn't work, and then dropped it. And so for us, you know, the last guy in, we had 90 days to close. And so we just started with Bill and said, Bill, you know, what's a deal killer here? So we talked to them about the parking. We thought that was comfortable for them. The number of units was not a problem. We even talked about the reduction in size, but found out it wasn't required.
My biggest concern about the 2.1 is whether we can legally do that. Brian, can you?
Right, yeah, we looked in both the 14.50 parent 10 Arbors Pro Zone has a 2.25 minimum requirement, and the default, even for the high density residential, which just refers to chapter 14.37, says for 2 and 3 bedroom apartments, it's 2.25. So, of course, the council has the ability to go back to eventually change the code, both with regard to the defaults and with regard to the pro zone itself. But as far as the development agreement, we could only reduce it to the statutory minimum to the 2.25.
Without more public notice.
Right, right, without doing a different kind of action here.
Jerem's just pointing out to me that 14.5 2 is high-density mixed-use project redevelopment is only 2.1. So maybe.
Yeah, but that's a specialized pro zone, so that applies to maybe 1, maybe 2 projects at the most. It's not the default zoning regulation. So that was a zoning regulation adopted for a specific project.
So how many more stalls would that account for, Mr. Horn? The difference between 2.25 and 2.1, has anyone been putting a pencil to that?
18 stalls.
18 stalls.
It's the difference between 248 and 266.
How close are we right now? Sounds like we can get 2.25.
I'm just trying to keep us legal here is all. I'm not really against the 2.1, but I just want to make sure that we can get you as quickly as we can without having to go through a whole bunch of more process.
Sure. One thing you could do, if, I don't know what the time frame for the process is, but instead of putting a number in, we could amend the development agreement so that it says that the minimum required parking is the same as whatever the minimum required parking in the zone is, and not reference a number. And then if they want the 2.1, they could go back and ask for a text amendment, and as soon as the text amendment went through, that would change the development agreement too. So just as a, but I don't know if they want to go through the text amendment process, but that's one way we could handle it.
Would give them that option anyway.
Yeah.
That would be wonderful. If we have the option, these things kind of work out that if it's 2.25, we'll get there and be 6.5 short. And then we need to talk again. So the site is rather cramped. and we have that big hill behind us. We have, by the way, repinned the hill and replanted the hill and at a fairly immense cost, a lot more than what we anticipated. But it's now safe, and we've got the canal company to sign off on that. So if anything you can do to help us on the 2.25 would be appreciated.
Mr. Winterton?
I know that this will come up when we open it to public comment, but what is the rule on parking on University Avenue at this point? We don't have anybody from the engineering department here, but I notice on the east side that there's a lot of that area is no parking.
There doesn't seem to be any preclusion from parking there, and the mall completely uses that side.
They use the west side quite heavily, but the east side, I've noticed signs, and I don't know.
Because no one needs it. We've got more than enough parking there right now, far too much. We did count that up, and that would give us an additional 50 parking spaces, which makes 2.5 reasonable at that point. But I would assume that that's at the leisure of the UDOT. I don't think it's something that I would want as a developer count on.
And
I've seen cars parked on the east side there too.
There's a few, but I haven't seen signs that say, I looked yesterday just to see where they were, and I'm just concerned about 50 mile an hour coming out of that canyon at some point to some degree, and I know that our neighborhood chair is going to bring that up when he has his opportunity, but.
We're not anticipating using it yet.
Great, thanks, Harrison.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, UDOT has plans to eliminate that parking.
Oh, really? On both sides?
On both sides.
Any other questions for the developer, Mr. Horn, or the architect, Mr. Warnick? If not, we'd love to hear first from the neighborhood chair, Mr. Ben Markham. I know he is here representing that neighborhood, and would love to hear any comments or feedback that you have, Mr. Markham, on your behalf for those you represent.
I'm Ben Markham. I reside in Provo. I'm the neighborhood chair for the River Bottoms neighborhood, and I want to thank Mr. Garrett, Mr. Sewell, and Mr. Winterton, who made me aware of this potential amendment to a development agreement. It's interesting that right now in the process that we have, the neighborhood process is completely left out of amendment to a development agreement, and I think that should be addressed at some point. There may be some where it's not needed. This is not one of them. Let me say that the unfinished south end of the Arbors project is one of my top 4 eyesores in our neighborhood. I have a passion to try to get that corridor coming into Provo out of the canyon, the first couple of miles, looking really good. And so I am thrilled that there is a viable project being considered, and I want to do what I can to make it good. I was also aware, though not as firmly as Mayor Curtis stated it, that UDOT fully intends to eliminate parking along University Avenue. East and west is what I was told, and this is a few months ago. I meet with UDOT from time to time to nag them about having a raised curb median there, because I get tired of seeing all the violations of the right-in, right-out only entrances. And by the way, this project adds one more, so in the first two blocks really after 4800, there's 2 for Canyon Brook, and then there'll be one on the south end of this project, an uncontrolled, should be right-in, right-out only access. And I continue to feel strongly that we need to have a raised curb there to control the unauthorized left turns that happen quite frequently. But that's not really relevant to what we're talking about tonight. Let me say a few things that are relevant. I don't know if you took the time to read through the agreement, but I was particularly interested in item 2 in exhibit, I can't talk, D. Basically what it says is you write CC&Rs, and I'm sure they've been written, and you form a homeowners association, an HOA, to enforce the CC&Rs. And then the enforcement just seems to me to be unusual. I don't know the data right now. 2 years ago, when the Silverado project was coming along, that eventually was bought out and not developed across the street, basically, I did talk with the homeowners association at the Arbors to find out some things. At that point, the Arbors, the existing project, phase one, was only about 50% owner occupied, and the homeowner association was struggling. It's difficult with that level of non-owners to get the kind of momentum one needs in a homeowners association to fulfill their roles. Well, the development agreement says that the homeowners association should make sure that occupancy on the project to limit it to not more than 2 unrelated persons. Now, the norm in Provo is 3. And so this would indeed help parking if it were limited to that. I would question that it's actually being limited to that right now. But I don't have any data. I didn't have time once I learned about this and got back in the country to do any work on it. They also asked the HOA to limit the total number of motor vehicles owned or possessed by tenants of the property to not more than the number of legal parking places. As an owner where I'm trying to rent out a unit, that's going to bother me a little bit if somebody comes and says, wait a minute, we only have room for 1 car for your unit now. So it just seemed very unusual restrictions with the HOA responsible for enforcement. It also requires that at least 15% of the parking places, excluding handicap, be continuously available for visitor parking. The one parking per dwelling is in there, and then a required adoption of a parking enforcement policy that requires strict adherence to the policies of the association and will have penalties for non-compliance. I would like to talk to the association and find out if that is actually happening now. One of the concerns that I'm hearing tonight, my concern is parking along University, and when that goes away, it will be problematic in this, there will be a problem in there. I drove down there tonight at 5 o'clock on the way here. There were 5 cars parked on the east side of University in front of Canyon Brook, and that's typical. Canyon Brook usually has a few parked out on the street. And there were 2 in front of the Arbors. Now, I don't have any idea if they were residents or non-residents or why they were parked there, but I observed 2 cars. Don't observe cars in front of Arbors very often. I would agree with what Mr. Horn said right now, that the parking seems to be adequate. But if I understand what I just heard from Mr. Horn, the new parking 2.25 or 2.1 or wherever it is will retroactively apply to phase 1 also. And so you're taking advantage of some existing parking in phase 1. So the whole project will be 2.25 compliant. And again, I have concerns that we're going to bump some limits there. I appreciate that a lot of other places have less parking. I lived on the East Coast for a long time, and 2.25 would be luxurious. But we also know from looking at the ITE manual, Provo is a bit unusual in terms of how much we use our cars and how many cars we have. And so I would question if you can successfully park all the units of phase 1 and phase 2 at a 2.25 ratio. And that is a concern to me as a neighbor. We want our neighbors to be able to get in and out and have a place to park and not park on the highway, which will eventually be illegal for them to do if I understand what UDOT's intention is. I also attempted to find some information and was unable to. Just south of the Arbors project is Canyon Brook. And I mentioned there's typically a few cars parked on the road in front of Canyon Brook. I was unable to determine what the parking stalls, spaces per unit is for Canyon Brook. I wanted to find out that and see if there's any evidence of if it's a low number, then it explains some cars out in front. If it's a 2.6 number or even 2.25 and we've still got cars out in front, that's a concern. I don't know whether or not they're limited to 2 unrelated adults in a unit or not, as is currently in the CCNRs apparently for at least phase one of the Arbors project. So there are a number of things that I feel like we probably ought to have a better handle on before this decision is made. And I realize it's kind of my responsibility, maybe as neighborhood chair, to try to dig some of that out. I just didn't get an opportunity to work on it. And I'd like you to consider allowing some time for us to get some more information together on this before significantly changing the parking. Now, having said all that, I'll go back to my first statement. I really want this to happen. It fills a gap. It'll look great. It's, you know, there's very little neighbor concern. Even with 4 stories, it's well under the hill, so even the neighbors up on the hill are not encumbered by it. One other thing, that as long as I'm being crazy, I might as well be completely crazy. I would love to see a traffic connection between Canyon Brook and Arbors to limit one of those right in, right out only curb cuts. I don't think, it wouldn't be easy to do, so I don't think it's possible, but you gotta have a dream. Any questions or comments?
Any
Besides
questions
sit
for
down?
Mr. Markham?
Dave?
Thank you, Ben. Oh, Dave, you have one?
You mentioned you'd like to see a little more time to get a handle on this. How much time, and are you suggesting a neighborhood meeting, or would you just like to research this as the chair and come back to us, or do you want to send it to the planning commission, or what were you thinking?
I'm not sure a neighborhood meeting makes sense because there aren't many real neighbors around this, but I don't know that. I'd like to talk with some people in the HOA. I'd like to talk with some people in the HOA at Canyon Brook and try to get a little more information about what they see as issues at Canyon Brook that might be parallel to this. And at that point, it may be appropriate to have a larger neighborhood meeting, though my current thinking is not.
And how much time would you think you would need?
I think I'd only need a couple of weeks, so I'll ask for a month. It's, you know, finding the right people and talking to them. Obviously, I need to sit down with Mr. Horn and his organization and get a little better understanding of what they're really proposing. But as I understood it, they're going to, whatever policy that gets set will apply to the entire Arbors project, phase 1 and phase 2. And so you need to understand the consequences of that better. I'm going to try to find ways to make this successful and happen. I mean, that's what I want. But I just initially saw some things that raised some concern.
Okay. If there is a problem with this is such a unique project, it's their problem. And we could watch that, because I just don't see that it's going to expand to really affect, it could affect the south, the Canyon, Canyon Brook people to some degree if the Arbors went and parked there, if they don't have enough parking. But this is such a unique project.
Yeah.
They're going to have to deal with their parking issues on their own property. This might be almost a case study for us to see where are we with this 2.25, or as the city, to look at that and say, are we over parking?
Yeah, let me reinforce some of the things you're saying. The likely clientele for the Arbors could be young professionals working across the street that might choose to walk or even bike to work. There is, you know, an argument there, and there is some mass transit that runs up and down University, but not a lot. So there, you know, there is a case that says, yeah, this should be, you know, we ought to test the water at a lower parking level. You know, my job is to try to keep all the neighbors happy, and if you end up filling up the place and people are...
And Ben, that's why you've got so much gray hair.
Yeah, it has nothing to do with that.
Oh.
You haven't met my daughter yet, have you? Okay. Don't laugh that hard, Al.
Thank you, Mr. Markham.
Thank you.
Sometime in a different setting, we'll look forward to hearing what your other 3 priority projects are for University Avenue. Yes, Mr. Horn.
I just maybe respond to a couple of things. First of all, thanks, Ben. I appreciate all your comments, and I think we can accommodate everything he's talked about. A couple of points that we have already studied that I would make known to you is that we have looked and done the same research on the parking of the project next to us, wondering why are they parking out in the street. All night long and all afternoon, they are 30 to 35% empty in their underground parking. They're parking out on the University Avenue because it's convenient. That's all. They can just park their car, and those that are going right to their front door across the lawns, that's the only reason that they're parking out there. So they actually are overbuilt on their parking right now if they use their parking, okay? The second thing is that in the homeowner's documents, and we've had these conversations with the HOA, that if anyone is renting to students, the moment we connect with them, which is we start paying our share, the moment we start construction. So we've already made it clear to them that if there are any students, they got to go. We really don't feel like enforcing that right now because they have 3 times as much parking as what they need. But, and I don't know that there are any, I would guess that there's probably at least a couple apartments there. I asked them and they said, no, we don't rent to students. With 3 bedrooms, I would guess that that's probably not the case. There's probably a few that are stuck in there. So there already is a methodology for us to be able to enforce that. And if we didn't enforce it, the city clearly can enforce that. It's written into our bylaws, and it's also, I believe, in the approval that you gave to the original developer 8-10 years ago. So if that helps.
Mr. Horn, is the, or Mr. Warnick, is the parking at Phase 1 permitted? Are the residents, do they have parking permits that they're issued by the HOA, or is it just open,
They have,
as far as you know?
They have, what do you call it, little fobs that get them downstairs, and,
Okay.
and the parking is assigned 1 space to each one of them, and so that's how they don't have a problem.
Okay,
So
because I know at Canyon Brook, they actually only issue 2 parking permits per unit.
Right.
And that, so the cars on the street could be units that have a 3rd car but aren't allowed to park inside.
Well, that's possible. That's possible. What we're finding, though, is that if anyone cared to, usually we'll try about the time people get home from work, and then we try it again at 3 o'clock in the morning so we know who's going to be empty all night. And we found 30 to 35%. Twice we did it. Once was 30% vacant. The other time was 35% vacant in the underground parking. We just assumed it was convenience. Also, I'd mentioned that at 2.25, we also have 2 parking spaces for every person in our project, and for guest parking and also for handicap parking. So the fact that if somebody did have 3 cars, there's overflow parking that would accommodate that.
And then can I conclude, Mr. Horn, from Mr. Markham's comments, that there is an egress on the south end of the project, an additional egress, in addition to the one that's controlled by the signal on the north end?
There's 2. There's the one that we'll be opening up, and you can see the curb cut. Then there's also the one on the north end, which also has a light. So that allows for left-hand turns and right-hand turns.
Okay. And if you wanted to access the light, you could go from Phase 2 to
Absolutely.
Phase 1?
Yes,
and go out
we
that way.
absolutely can. The project can be accessed, both entrances, either one of the entrances can be accessed from the other.
Thank you. We would invite at this time any members of the public who have come to speak to this item to approach the podium and offer public comment at this time.
My name is...
You just, the tip of the microphone, yeah. There you go.
My name is David Harding. I'm a resident of Provo. I was having a conversation earlier about how a question like this should be decided when you have a development agreement and now a request to make a modification to it. One principle to approach this would be to look at it if this change was part of the original agreement, would the original agreement have been approved? One risk of changing these agreements is you may signal to developers that if they want to get a zoning change, if they want to get something approved, they can promise really high, because they can always come back in and make modifications later, modifications that may not have presented a project that would have been approved in the first place. So you may want to look at it from that perspective. If these are modifications that would have been acceptable in the original, then yeah, great, go ahead and approve it. Just make sure you signal that, you know, this is being done because it would have been acceptable in the first place. A second principle would be to look at, well, this site has a history, it has multiple owners and whatnot. What is the best thing now for Provo City? So that's a second principle to look at, you know, approaching this decision, and possibly with different outcomes to that question. So, you know, I'm not advocating one way or another. I'm not advocating approval or rejection of this request. The devil's advocate in me, though, wants to respond just to a couple things. We talked about density, you know, additional units, and well, these additional units would have fit in to the original zoning. I don't know the history, but just something to consider is if this was not zoned, or if this was zoned at the same time that the project was being approved and the agreement was being made, it's possible that it was only zoned that because the project made sense. In the study session earlier, there seemed to be some discussion on whether a proposal was originally marked at, well, if you like this, it will need to be MDL, and then the developer said, oh, well, if it's going to be MDL, well, we could do this and this and this, and built it, you know, much higher than what would have been probably approved in the first place. So it's maybe one of those things that while, you know, the density could be higher because of the way it's zoned now, it wouldn't have been rezoned that way if that was the original proposal. So just to look at it from that perspective. Parking is a very interesting topic, interesting issue. I think things are changing and we need to be flexible. I think there are some benefits for moving towards Park City as far as reducing the number of parking stalls and some of those things. But understanding that, you know, we may not be there yet. It may make sense in certain parts of Provo, but it may not make sense up far north on University Ave. I appreciate Mr. Markham's comments about, well, you know, some people may be moving there to be close to work and they can bike. But other than that, I don't see a lot of transportation options, alternatives yet. And so, you know, you could look at it until we are serious about providing transportation alternatives. Maybe we need to you know, maintain a higher parking standard. Of course, I would advocate that we move towards those alternatives and reduce parking, but you know, that's not the question for tonight. So appreciate your time.
Thank you, Mr. Harding. Any others? If not, we'll close public comment and bring back to the council for discussion or any other questions they may have for the developer.
Mr. Chair, I'm prepared to make a motion to approve the resolution, but only if I understood Mr. Jones correctly. If the resolution were amended in the way you recommended, then the issue of the number of parking permits per owner would be negotiable. That is a matter of conversation between the owner, Mr. Markham, community development, public works, anyone else who might be party to such a conversation.
And the Planning Commission and ultimately the council. You know, my proposal, the current draft of the amendment simply replaces the number 2.6 with, it did replace it with 2.1, that would have to be 2.25 instead. So my proposal would instead be that paragraph could read, the project shall have the minimum number of parking spaces per dwelling unit, not including handicap designated parking spaces, required by Provo City Code Section 14.50 parent 10.170. The intent of that is that means that because that section of city code right now says 2.25, then the agreement right now would, as soon as you pass this amendment, would be 2.25. But if the developer went to the to community development and through the planning commission and came back to the council and asked for that section of the code to be changed to 2.1, then immediately upon changing the code, the agreement would correspond with the code.
That's the motion I make.
So that's the substance of your motion then, Mr. Miller. Thank you. Is there a second to that motion? Mr. Van Buren, any council questions or discussion? Mr. Sewell.
I have a concern, and Mr. Markham mentioned this as well. We have kind of an anomaly in our process where it's a lot easier to get a change in a development agreement than it is to get the project approved in the first place. We kind of, we short circuit the going through a staff report, going to the planning commission. In this case, the neighborhood chair might not have even known that this was on the agenda, if it had not been for three of us that reached out to him. So for me personally, a good middle ground here would be to allow the neighborhood chair to have 2 weeks to do the research he's indicated that that he would like to do. I think he's rooting for this to be a success, but I'd still like to hear what he would come up with, and to raise our comfort level that 2.25 is going to be okay and that we're not going to have spillover onto the street, since we're lowering it on both halves of the project. So I would like to make a counter motion that would continue it for 2 weeks.
Thank you, Mr. Sewell. A counter motion to continue the item for 2 weeks. Is there a second to that motion?
Can I ask a question? Mr. Markham, how do you feel about working with Mr. Horn? You two are both great people, and I think that you could possibly work something out and feel comfortable with this. I respect the challenge that Mr. Sewell has expressed, and we need to do something that in our city regarding those changes to agreements, development agreements. I agree with that. But if you two can work together, I feel confident in both of you, and hope that your concerns will be satisfied, and Mr. Horn can work with you in alleviating those concerns.
And to Mr. Sewell's counter motion, could I ask a question to Mr. Horn? You mentioned earlier the urgency in getting your approval, your financing in place for this, to the point that you were willing to make additional parking concessions even this evening. Could you just speak briefly at the podium to that urgency? What impact would an additional 2 weeks have on your financing?
Yeah, we've actually purchased this, and we're anticipating being.
Could you speak closer to that mic? Yes, thank you.
Yeah, we were anticipating being able to move forward through our communication with the planning department. And we certainly did not mean to leave anyone out of the planning process. We were assured by the planning department that these things could be done in-house and that they didn't need to go through all these committees. I don't object to going through all the committees, it's just fine. But we weren't anticipating that time delay. So we're now getting close to 7-8 months that we've been going through the process. I would just remind everyone of just this one thing. These are 2-bedroom units. Almost everyone there are retirees or very young families. To think that we're going to have triple car families, quadruple car families in this makes reason stare. I really just cannot, in my mind, think of the affluency of these young families or even retirees that necessitates them having 3 cars or more than 2 cars. And in general, a lot of them, a lot of the young families there are really just 1-car families. And so at 2.25, we're providing 2 cars for every family, and the 2.5 provides an overflow of, I believe, something like 18 spaces on top of that, without ever using University Avenue. So you know, I would ask respectfully that we could keep with the first proposal, and I'll work with the neighborhood, and we can get along just fine, Gary. And you know, we have tried to do the things that would make the project more appealing, but recognizing there is a limit in the size of these units to the number of occupancy that can live in them. And so I really would say almost with any city, including Salt Lake City and St. George, they're abandoning the 2.25 even. It's overkill, and it just becomes an asphalt jungle. And so, you know, we look at it and say we've doubled and tripled our setbacks. We've reduced by 27% the usable square footage in the property, which maintains, we'll have smaller families and smaller units. And so with all those changes, all speak to less parking and less intense, you know, traffic flow. So,
Thank you.
Respectfully ask.
Thank you, Mr. Horn. Is there a second to the motion put forward by Mr. Sewell?
So did Mr. Markham, you kind of nodded when Mr. Winterton asked if you could work together. Do you mind coming to the microphone and just explain what your thoughts are? Sorry to call you up again.
I think, again, I'm interested in this project going forward, and so I'd like to find a very, a good approach. I just don't have enough information right now to feel comfortable that we're not going to have a long-term parking issue there. I'll give you an example. These are referred to as two-bedroom units, yet in the write-up about them, there is a office/nursery third room that could easily, literally have a curtain hung in the hallway and turn into a third bedroom if 3 students, for instance, wanted to live there, or 1 student and a couple of guys that are working across the street. So I'd like to spend a little more time looking at this. I'd like to find out a little bit more about who is currently in the arbors, the phase 1, what kind of clientele there is. When I spoke with the HOA president a couple of years ago, there were a lot of almost transient people in there because of the low owner occupancy. I hope that's improved. I also want to talk with the people in Canyon Brook and find out what is typical in their clientele. I realize there's a little different style between the two, but I'd like to learn a little bit more and get comfortable that we will have situations where 2 cars is the norm or too many. I don't agree with one thing Mr. Horn said, that empty nesters only have 2 cars. Some reason we all got to have a pickup or a motorcycle besides the 2 cars, and so.
So within the homeowners association, they have some controls in place for not renting to students and having just two unrelated. And so your concern is that that may not be enforced, or your concern is?
Yes, my concern is, based on my knowledge of the homeowners association there, that it's not being enforced.
Okay, so your preference is still to give 2 more weeks, knowing all of the details now, or as far as the developer,
Yeah,
Mr. Horn?
if it's approved tonight, I'm not going to spend my time chasing information.
But
I
you
got
still like
other
the 2
important
weeks to
things
look
do.
into it and come back?
But I do understand that, there's always urgency to get, for developers, getting financing and things like that. So it's an interesting decision that you folks have.
Mr. Chair, may I ask a clarifying question of the developer?
Yes.
I haven't seen the floor plan. The floor plans are 2-bedroom units. Is there a 3rd den or nursery in these units?
I don't think you can call it a nursery, I suppose someone used it for that, but they are just 2 bedrooms.
Okay, but can you describe this 3rd room? Is it bedroom size? Is it?
It's smaller than the other 2. It does not have a closet in it. It has wire glass window that opens onto the exterior. It's not, we will not rent it as a bedroom. The other point would just be this, that we just finished a 63-unit project in in Oahu. And the Hawaiian people are notorious for just paying no attention to rules, okay? And so we had parking problems there. Immediately, everybody wanted to bring 5, 6 cars. And, day one, we just started towing them. We towed them. At the end of 2 months, nobody had over the number of cars they're supposed to have. So all of these things are manageable. And, we manage things very tightly. I don't know how this other one, with the bankruptcy and with all the problems that they've had in the project next to us, their appetite for some discipline is very high. And they're very excited about us coming on board. I think we will bring that discipline to the project. And if there are students renting there, we will have enough votes that we can make certain that they are asked to leave. And the same thing with parking. We'll simply tow the cars. It's just not an issue of a difficult issue. Just once or twice, and then you learn that you can't bring 4 cars to a 2-car apartment. But I think these comments have been great, but they are very, very manageable, and we have all the documentation in place to manage them. The homeowner's documents are well written, and the rules are very clear. So, I think we can take it, and I'm fine with 2 weeks. I'd love to get with Ben, make him feel comfortable. Okay, so let's take the 2 weeks. I'll come back in 2 weeks, and hopefully Ben and I will be both feeling a little bit better about the decisions we've made. Okay.
Mr. Chair, the only purpose of my asking that question was some of the history behind why a provision is in the development agreement. It may be relevant, it may not be relevant. I really have no motive here other than I know the history behind this provision and some of the parking issues of the council back then, because I was the project manager over this rezone request when I was in planning. One of those special conditions says larger dwelling units shall consist of 2 bedrooms and a den or nursery rather than a 3rd bedroom. The den and nursery shall not have a closet. And that provision was put in because of a parking concern, not wanting that 3rd room to become a 3rd single occupant scenario. So you can rent up to 3 singles in this situation. And however, if you're moving the closet per building code, it couldn't be deemed as a bedroom. So it was to be labeled as a den or nursery. And that alleviated some of the concern of the council at that time about the parking concerns and single occupancy. So just a little context for that strange provision in the development agreement.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. And we have a drawing of the unit here now, so I assume that 3rd room then, Mr. Horn, is in the lower left of unit type A?
Correct.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Horn.
It's the 2-bedroom unit when the little closet like the PVC is actually stairs continuing going down to the washroom and the laundry. There is no closet. No, this is the main one. But there isn't a 3rd room in this. You see, right where it says unit type A to the right, to the left, you have 2 bedrooms. And then the one down in the lower left corner is that den / nursery.
Okay. Well, you can see how small that is. I didn't even think that was a bedroom.
Yeah.
That's the 3rd area, which really is not a bedroom. It's a pretty small area.
Thank you, Mr. Horn. Mr. Sewell?
I just wanted to mention, I feel like Mr. Markham is very thorough in his research, having worked with him, and I heard a member of staff comment to me the other day that they thought he was one of the best neighborhood chairs that we have in the city. I also wanted to say that, Mike, I'm actually very positive about this project. If I didn't have a process concern, I would probably vote to approve it. But I'm concerned about the message that we would be sending if we don't take the neighborhood concerns or the neighborhood chair's concerns into account. It would kind of make me, wonder why we even asked him to come down tonight if we didn't give him at least those 2 weeks to investigate those concerns.
Thank you, Mr. Sewell. Other comments? Ms. Santiago?
Well, I appreciate Mr. Markham and his willingness to represent the neighborhood. It's no small task, and to come down and give us his comments. And I also appreciate Mr. Horn being willing to also wait the 2 weeks and to work that out. So I would second Mr. Sewell's substitute motion.
Thank you. So we have a substitute motion and a second. Any other discussion on the substitute motion? Those in favor? Those opposed? So the substitute motion passes by a vote of 6-1. In favor, Mr. Hale, Mr. Miller, Ms. Hales, Ms. Santiago, Mr. Garrett, Mr. Sewell, Mr. Winterton, and opposed, Mr. Van Buren. Thank you. We'll look forward to continuing this in 2 weeks. Our final item is somewhat of a housekeeping item, a resolution amending the 2015 council regular meeting schedule by changing the November 10th meeting to a special or emergency meeting and changing November 17th to a work and council meeting. Mr. Taylor.
Thank you. Statute requires that you adopt an annual calendar, and our last leadership meeting, it was determined to adjust the calendar for November, as noted in the item description. And so we just need a resolution amending that formal calendar so we can republish that to the state website and our other outlets as being the official calendar for the year.
Mr. Taylor, would you care to give a brief description as to the reason for this change related to the canvassing?
Yes, state statute, well, Brian's probably more articulate, but it boils down to you have to. No, you don't have to. It boils down to the Board of Canvassers has the, you have to allow the absentee ballots to be counted basically to the very last day of the period. So for practical reasons, that's 2 weeks after the election day of November 3rd, I believe, this year. So you would have to have that Board of Canvasser meetings on the 17th. So it was determined, rather than bringing in twice on the 10th and the 17th, that you would just consolidate, handle both the Municipal Council meeting and the Board of Canvasser meetings together.
Thank you. Any questions? I'll look for a motion then regarding this resolution. Ms. Santiago?
Mr. Chair, I move that we approve this resolution as written.
Thank you. And a second? Mr. Sewell, thank you. Those in favor? Are there any opposed? The motion passes unanimously. I'll now call for a motion to adjourn. Motion to adjourn by Ms. Hales, and a second by Ms. Santiago. Those in favor? Thank you.